Welcome to Spell Combat, Ice Storm versus Wall of Fire or Firewall. This is actually a video I've been wanting to do for a while, and I'm actually going to be on DDOcast this Sunday talking about druid spells, and it reminded me that I've been wanting to do this video. And so, in this video, and it's going to be for new players, by the way, people who are new to the game, or maybe you're new to casters. You know, maybe you've been playing melee for a while, but you want to knock out some caster path lives, or you're just interested in trying out caster. If you're new to casters or new to the game, there are going to be some important differences between Wall of Fire and Ice Storm that you might not realize at first. And so, going to be discussing some of those. This isn't to try to sell you on one versus the other, but just to itemize some important distinctions between the two. And I will also talk about, my choice for what I like to use as my default. They're both great spells. They should both be on your spell list. They're both awesome AoE area of effect DPS spells. So let's talk about some of the merits of each. Now, I'm an old pen and paper guy. So when I first started playing DDO many years ago, I saw Wall of Fire and I was like, God, that's, pen and paper. It's very limited use, very sort of situational, because it can harm your allies and yourself. But in DDO, you quickly learn that spells like Fireball and Firewall, they don't hurt you and your friends, so you can just toss them anywhere and not have to worry. So it's a huge difference right there, which makes Firewall way more valuable in DDO than it is in pen and paper, just for general use. Now, one of the sort of considerations that's a wash for both of these spells is that the damage they do, the scaling, and the cost of both of them are similar, so that's not really a consideration. And one obvious consideration is if you're fire spec versus cold spec. If you're fire spec, then you might want to use Firewall as your sort of default go-to AoE DPS spell, or cold spec than Ice Storm, for example. Now, I'm going to be talking mostly about how, these spells relate to a caster druid, but druids aren't the only classes with Wall of Fire and Ice Storm on their spell list. You got wizards and sorcerers, both have them as level 4 spells. On druid, though, Ice Storm is a level 4 spell. Wall of Fire is a level 5 spell. And that's an important difference that I'll mention, limited situationally, but there are going to be some very powerful mobs that you come across, like the Abbot, for example, or like the Demon Queen, that have a mantle of invulnerability, and you can examine them and see, it says they have a mantle of invulnerability, and they're immune to 4th level and lower spells. Well, on a wizard, for example, or a sorcerer, Wall of Fire is a 4th level spell, so a mob like Abbot that has mantle of invulnerability is going to be immune to a wizard's Firewall, or a sorcerer's Firewall. But on a druid, since it's a 5th level spell, you can use Wall of Fire on the Abbot, for example, or like the Demon Queen when she goes to war, and it will affect him. So that's a pretty neat difference. Obviously, if you're a caster druid, you're getting Ice Storm at level 7, because it's a 4th level spell. You're not getting Firewall till level 9, so that's a consideration too. You want to start using Ice Storm as soon as you get it, and then at level 9, when you get Wall of Fire, then you could start using that in situations that you like. So, some differences that you might not be aware of. One of the giant differences between Wall of Fire and Ice Storm is that with Wall of Fire, there is a save, and any mob gets a save for half. And if you're fighting evasion mobs and you don't have particularly good saves on your spells, they're not going to be taking any damage from your Wall of Fire. So not a very useful spell against evasion mobs, or mobs with good saves. Again, they're saving for half. Ice Storm, no save whatsoever. And that's huge. Evasion mobs with high save, they're taking full damage no matter what. Just giant. And when I first started playing DDO, I was a Firewall guy for a long time. One of the things that I sort of didn't like about Ice Storm was, well, when you toss a Firewall, cast it, it appears immediately, but you throw an Ice Storm, and it just sort of like seems to take a few seconds for it to appear. And I was bugged by that. So I stayed away from Ice Storm for a long time until, a few years into it, somebody's like, you know, this has no save, and I was like, what? What? Yeah, that's huge. So that is a giant consideration too. Another really cool thing about Ice Storm is that it has a built-in slowing effect. So, you know, like if you're fighting in the middle of your Ice Storm, or you're doing your little Firewall dance or Ice Storm dance, and you know, I'm talking about, you know, like when you're new to caster, you know, what you can do is you grab a big group of mobs together and you throw a wall of fire and you sort of jump and dance around it, you know, kiting mobs in and out of your firewall. That's a sort of one of the early play styles that you learn as a caster, but that, while it can be very effective and it's great for newbies because, you know, you're trying not to get hit, you know, newbies tend to be squishy. It's a very irritating way to play. You know, if you're grouped with other people, they don't like the fact that you're kiting mobs all over the place. It's hard for melees to hit, so it's not a group-friendly way to play. But like I said, that can be really helpful for newbies to sort of learn the spell and, you know, and to not die. In addition to the built-in slowing effect that Ice Storm has, if you are a druid and you run in water elemental form and you have Mantle of the Icy Soul on, Mantle of the Icy Soul gives your cold spells an additional slowing effect. It says take a 25% penalty in movement speed for mobs that are targeted by your cold spell. So additional slowing effect is really nice. Now, I like to fight in my AoEs, and so, you know, if you follow my videos, you know that I play like a tanky caster druid, and I like to toss down a bunch of AoEs and just fight right in the middle of it. You know, when I was pretty new to DDO, and, you know, I was doing the Firewall dance, and I remember one time, you know, or I guess early on, seeing people that, you know, seeing casters like wizards and sorks that were, you know, they'd get a shield and they'd just sort of turtle up right in the middle of their firewall and let the mobs beat on him while the firewall was chewing him down. And I was like, oh, that guy's a baller. I want to do that, you know. So that was sort of the genesis of like me wanting to build a more tanky kind of a caster. And now, you know, I'm got this tune so defensive that, you know, I can kite half the dungeon together and throw down my AoEs and you know, just fight them all in the middle of that. And it's pretty awesome, a lot of fun. Enough about that, though. So what are some other considerations about these spells? Another big one about you know, Ice Storm is that it does both cold damage and bludgeoning damage, and that's particularly nice for a druid because a druid doesn't have a lot of spells that do untyped damage, you know, bludgeoning damage untyped. And another nice thing for any caster is that for even mobs that are immune to cold damage, that your Ice Storm is still going to hit them because part of that damage is bludgeoning. One of the really nice things about Firewall is that undead mobs take extra damage with Firewall. So if you're fighting a lot of undead, the Firewall might, you know, you might want to use Firewall more than Ice Storm. Another thing is that you can't use them both at the same time. You know, if you throw down a Firewall and you or somebody else comes along and throws down an Ice Storm, puts it right out. Or, I'm a big fan of Sleet Storm too. Sleet Storm is an awesome crowd control spell, is overlooked by so many people. This isn't a video about Sleet Storm, but I love to use it. Check it out. Maybe I'll do another video about it, talk about it in my videos. But Sleet Storm also puts out Wall of Fire. Boom. Gone. But Sleet Storm doesn't put out Ice Storm. You can have both those going at the same time. If you are a caster druid, you can put down Wall of Fire and Storm of Vengeance, though. Storm of Vengeance will not extinguish your firewalls. So that's pretty cool. So when you're targeting these spells, you know, you can just bring up your targeting reticle, both of them, and, you know, you can just sort of toss it anywhere. And when you cast, you know, and that doesn't really make a difference on your Ice Storms, but there is sort of a unique thing about Firewall in the way that it faces when you cast it. So when you cast Firewall, it casts perpendicular to the way that you are facing. But you can also hard target these spells. So I can target that dude over there and throw my Ice Storm, and that Ice Storm is centered on that guy there. I can do the same thing for Firewall. A Firewall, like I said, always faces perpendicular to the way that you're facing. So if you have a mob hard targeted And there are going to be situations like maybe you have a row of archers, for example. Sometimes archers don't move, maybe they're up on a ledge or something, and it can be beneficial to sort of have your firewall facing a certain way. So I have that archer targeted right now, and if I turn, let's say, 90 degrees to the right, and notice he's not in my line of sight anymore, but I still have him targeted. I cast my firewall. You can see that it cast perpendicular to the way that I was facing. So I just turned to the right, and I could have even turned around, but that wouldn't have made a difference compared to just looking at him. But it does make a difference, like if you turn it at a right angle, or whatever angle you're facing changes the way that the firewall is facing. The firewall, it radiates damage from the front and from the back, but not off to the sides, not to the left and right of it. So that's a consideration for how you cast your firewall. So let's see, are there any other considerations about them? So, some mobs are going to be immune to one type or the other. Again, Ice Storm is going to damage basically anything because it does bludgeoning, untyped damage in addition to the cold damage. And, Wall of Fire, there are quite a few mobs in the game that are immune to fire, but that doesn't mean you can't use Wall of Fire, just generally speaking. Most mobs are going to take fire damage. There's just a lot more that are immune to fire than other types of damage. So, like devils are immune to fire, for example. Iron golems are actually healed by fires. You definitely don't want to use Wall of Fire against an iron golem because you're just going to heal them and piss off your party. So, for me, I like to run as a cold druid, in water elemental form. And, if you are a druid, don't stress about like, oh, I want to use Firewall, but I'm in water elemental form. Should I switch? The penalties that you take is not that big of a deal. Don't hesitate to cast a Firewall while you're in water elemental form, and don't feel like you have to change the fire elemental form just to cast your Firewall. If you're fighting a lot of mobs, if you're using mostly fire spells in a quest, like Ghosts of Perdition, for example, or Temple of the Deathworm, for example, those are quests that I'll run in fire elemental form the entire time because a lot of mobs in there are immune to cold, and fire spells are a lot better. But for general purposes, like if you are a cold druid, don't feel like you have to switch to your fire elemental form to cast a Firewall. Like, it's still going to do good damage. Don't waste your time switching back and forth. But I do prefer Ice Storm as a general use spell because it has the slowing effect, because there's no save against it, because, and because, I'm as a cold spec druid, I'm doing a little bit more damage with my cold spells. And because I am cold, because I use water elemental form most of the time, I use Mantle of Icy Soul, so it has that additional slowing effect. So those are huge considerations for druid. Now, again, both spells awesome, both should be used, but there are situations when you're going to want to use one versus the other. So I hope that helps for you people that are newbies to casters or newbies to DDO. If you think I've missed a consideration about Wall of Fire or Ice Storm, please leave a comment. If you have any questions about my videos, you can respond on YouTube. And if you happen to be on Saralona, you are welcome to send me a tell.